Alright guys, buckle in, this one's going to be a long one. So if you guys know me, I've made a critique of Name the Trait, which is Ask Yourself's Argument. And this is what I have up on my blog. There's not too much up on my blog. It's mostly this and a few other things that I've written about. For the most part, it's a very underdeveloped thing. But I left up here all my writing about what the problems of Name the Trait is. And we're not going to go through that today. That's not going to be today's video, but I do plan on doing that. Either way, you can see I've written out, point by point, trying to get my point across um, in order to say why I think there's a problem with Name the Trait. And you can find that if you want. But what I wanted to discuss today was ask yourselves response to both this and the video me and Perspective Philosophy made about it. And I'm going to give a bunch of postings that come from the Discord server here about ask yourselves general response. I'm just going to ignore stuff like this. I don't care about that. Unless it actually comes in the form of a syllogism, right? I just ignore his garbage. That whole crew relies on the ambiguity of natural language to mask their non-argument. So when dealing with them, all you have to do is ask for syllogisms, and they faceplant. See foot soldier debate. If anyone is seen here posting or running, mine or Lewis's or foot soldiers sophistry without presenting a syllogism, they will be banned on site. What else do we have here? I've been asking for an argument that Name the Trait violates the law of identity for like half a year to no avail. By the way, which is not the argument. It's that it either violates the law of identity or the consequent doesn't obtain. They still haven't provided one, yet continue to make this claim. That's enough for me to dismiss them. If they have any actual argument against my position in there, you're welcome to present it. Premises and conclusions, please. This group of sophists relies on vagueness of natural language to mask their non-arguments, so I demand proper syllogism when dealing with them. This one we'll just ignore for a second. Is the syllogism thing for all arguments or just the shadow starshine shit? Good question, right? Oh, it's just perspective philosophy, vegan. I think that's a mistype of vegan foot soldier, and shadow starshine sophistry. But also other things, if anyone is equally vague and refuses to be cleared when asked repeatedly. He then asks, what are some examples of such vague arguments? I don't consider them arguments, so I have a problem with your phrasing. What are some examples of the kind of sophistry mentioned in the announcement? Just rambling at length with no clarity and acting like you have an argument, then refusing to give premises and conclusion when asked repeatedly. Doing that with any topic, really. So the purpose of this video is going to be exploring, is it reasonable to ask for syllogisms? Is it reasonable to ask for formalization? Is not providing these not providing an argument? Is it really vague to use natural language? So this is the sort of thing that I wanted to cover today. So I'm going to just pop up this one. And I'm just going to expand that a little bit. So we're going to go through this. I've prepared a bunch of things. First off, what is an argument? An argument is a premise or a set of premises that lead to a conclusion by the means of an inference. Just so you guys know, this is going to be all stuff from critical thinking. And I'm going to hope that you guys have at least a little bit of knowledge. I'm not expecting you to have a lot, but maybe coming in with absolutely none will make this video a little hard to follow. And I'm sorry if that's the case. I'm going to be doing a lot of the basics, so hopefully you'll be able to keep up with it. But if not, and you have some questions, feel free to leave them below. So it is very basic, but having absolutely no knowledge of what I'm talking about might make it tough. So here we have a very simple diagram of just what an argument is. It's premises and a conclusion. Premises and conclusions are statements. So if you're not sure what a statement is a sentence with a truth value. So it's possible that it could be true or false, right? So if I say, the Eiffel Tower is in Paris, or I can say that the Eiffel Tower is in Germany, right? These have truth values to them. They can either be true or false statements. This will be as opposed to something like a question, right? Like, what do you want for food today? That's not true or false. Or a command, right? Go to your room. That's not true or false. So premises and conclusions are statements. An argument exists when there's a connection between premises and conclusion statements. So when one statement and another statement lead to each other. And the way that they lead to each other is what's called an inference. Okay? So that's good to know what an argument is, to figure out whether or not you can have an argument in natural language or not. So the question becomes, can an argument be in natural language? The answer, they almost always are. Basically, every time you're trying to convince your friend of something by providing reasons for doing something or why they should believe something, that is what the heart of an argument is in philosophical conversations. So trying to convince a friend of a conclusion with reasons is an argument in the philosophical sense. Almost all philosophical books are written in natural language. If you doubt that, please go ahead and look up. You can look up some of the most famous philosophers, Hume, Locke, Descartes, all the Greeks, any of these works. And tell me if you just see a list of syllogisms and formal arguments, or if you actually just see natural language. Now, you could come to the conclusion, well, maybe philosophers don't make arguments, therefore. Feel free to read them and find out if they are making statements that lead to conclusions. If so, they are making arguments. So I'm going to give you guys a simple example of an argument. Billy, the arcade just got Pac-Man and Galaga. We should go there. It will be fun. All these sentences are statements, so they have a possibility of being true or false. The arcade just got Pac-Man and Galaga. That could be true or false. We should go there. That could be true or false. It will be fun. That could be true or false. The conclusion and premises are obvious. Now, you could probably take a look at this statement here and figure out what the conclusion is. It's one of the three statements. Which statements support which other statements? Then you'll have an idea of what the argument is. If you're not sure, I will point it out here. The argument is we should go to the arcade. The reasons are it will be fun, and it just got Pac-Man and Galaga. Those are the reasons we should go to the arcade. So this constitutes an argument, because there is a relation of statements leading to a conclusion. Conclusion. If someone says something is not an argument based on being in natural language, they are just wrong. Right? You can go ahead and look up any critical thinking book you want and try and disprove me. Go try and find anything that says only formal arguments are actual arguments. No. Premises exist within natural language. Conclusions exist within natural language. Sorry, one second. So this leads us to, doesn't formalizing arguments make things more clear? Isn't this a reasonable request? I mean, after all, the point of asking me for a formal argument is because he's trying to avoid vagueness, right? So it seems like a reasonable request. Oh, just something in my throat. Alright, so we're going to address that. To understand what formal logic can help make clear, it's important to understand the difference between syntax and semantics. Syntax concerns the structure, semantics concerns the meaning. So we'll just talk about this in sentences, normal sentences. What is syntax and semantics in sentences? Many of you probably already know this. In normal sentences, the syntax concerns the grammar. right? So the periods, the commas, the placements of the words. It is arranging the words properly so that the words can properly convey their meaning. Uh, the worse the grammar, the worse it is conveyed. So syntax does help meaning, but doesn't provide meaning, right? So we'll see examples of this here. My friend is becoming a black belt in karate tomorrow. That would be a grammatically fine sentence. Nothing wrong with it. If we change the syntax to friend tomorrow black karate belt is, it contains all the same meaning, all the friends tomorrow black karate belt, it's all there, but because the grammar is not present, it doesn't convey its meaning very well, right? You don't know how the words relate to each other. You're missing those necessary relations. Semantics, on the other hand, concerns the meaning of words themselves. Black represents the things we look at with our eyes and have blackness about them. We learn this by observation. How about a friend? What makes someone a friend? You may notice that no matter how I arrange the above sentence, you won't have a better idea of what a friend truly is. That's because it's a question for semantics and not syntax. So the point is, if you had a question, what truly makes a friend, then rearranging the grammar will never help you answer that question, right? We would have to talk about it through reference to other things. And that's why it's more of a question about semantics. In arguments, formalization helps with the syntax, not the semantics of the argument. Or more accurately, it can only help the semantics by organizing them to convey their information, not by explaining the information itself. So just like how the grammar for a sentence helps convey the meaning, formalizing arguments helps convey the meaning of an argument by showing how the premises connect to the conclusion, but doesn't tell you anything about the content of those premises or the content of those conclusions. All right, so point 2, formal arguments can be just as semantically vague as natural language. So now that we have the difference between semantics and syntax, I want to show you that while formal arguments do clear up syntax, they don't clear up semantics. So imagine the following argument. Oh man, do you have the things or the stuff? If so, we can go do this or that. This or that would make them happy. Oh, you do? Great. Now let's say I formalize this. P1, if you have the things or stuff, then we can go do this or that. If we go do this or that, then it would make them happy. You do have the things or stuff. Conclusion, it will make them happy. And here we have in sentential logic. Now you notice, even though I've formalized this, now that the syntax is clear, we know exactly how the premises relate to each other and how they lead to the conclusion, the semantics are still a mess. So formalizing this argument here did us no good, because the problem wasn't the syntax. The problem is, I have no idea what things or stuff is. Who's them? What is this or that? I don't know any of that, and formalizing this didn't help. So the point is, formal arguments can be just as semantically vague as natural language. Right? That's the point I really want to get across here, is that formal arguments do not clear up semantics at all. Right? So if something is semantically vague, asking me to formalize it is not going to help you. Point 3, syntax is often obvious without being explicitly stated. Right? So we're going to go back to the old example. Billy, the arcade just got Pac-Man and Galaga. We should go there. It will be fun. So we're going to try and formalize this. But first note that this argument is deductively invalid as written because of missing premises. There's actually premises missing in here that make this deductively invalid. And if I pointed them out, you'd just say, oh, well, duh. Duh, of course he's saying that. So here we go. Here's his argument in a formal structure. Premise 1, the arcade just got Pac-Man and Galaga. Premise 2, the arcade will be fun. Conclusion, we should go to the arcade. What premises is this argument missing to make it valid? If you can't figure out, it's probably because it's too obvious. So if you're able to look at this right here and realize why it's not valid, right, good, it's probably because you have some sort of critical thinking understanding. But if you're looking at it and saying, well, it makes sense to me, right? Why do you need to add anything else to it? That's because you can figure it out because it's already blatantly obvious. So I'm going to put in what it's missing to explain to you. Premise 1, the arcade just got Pac-Man and Galaga. Premise 2, Pac-Man and Galaga are fun. Subconclusion, the arcade will be fun. So in above here, these don't have a necessary relation, because just because the arcade has Pac-Man and Galaga, it doesn't mean the arcade will be fun. Not by necessity. It could have nothing to do with it. So unless I explicitly state that Pac-Man and Galaga have something to do with fun, it will not lead to the arcade being fun. So I need to put that premise in there, that Pac-Man and Galaga are fun. Now there's a relationship between the premises and the conclusion. We can also use logical operators if we want to be specific. So this is more of a sentential, though a better way to put it into sentential logic, is if the arcade has Pac-Man or Galaga, then the arcade, well, we'll just, oh, no, it was fine. The arcade will be fun. Then the arcade will be fun. The arcade has Pac-Man or Galaga, therefore the arcade will be fun. This is now a modus ponens, a simple type of syllogism. So now we can see the connection. And then the latter half, we have the arcade will be fun. We should go to the arcade. What would make this valid? Just because something is fun doesn't mean you should go to it. So these two statements actually have nothing to do with each other in a deductive way. So in order to make that deductively valid, we have to say the arcade will be fun. If the arcade will be fun, we should go to the arcade. Conclusion, we should go to the arcade. And then all 5 of those premises, all put together, form this. And here we have it in sentential logic. Now, the point is that all of this that you see here, all of this that you see here, is contained within Billy the Arcade just got Pac-Man and Galaga. We should go there. It will be fun. You probably already knew the missing premises. This one, and in the other example, Pac-Man and Galaga are fun. You probably realize that when Billy, when we'll call him Tommy says this, the reason he's telling us, the arcade has Pac-Man and Galaga is because it's fun. It relates to something he said. And you probably understand that he's saying we should go there because it will be fun. But his original statement doesn't actually contain those sentences. But you are able to put them in. And I'm saying it, you are able to do this is because they're blatantly obvious. So, did you need it? So now that all this is here, and now that all this is here, do you now finally understand what he was saying? Imagine Billy refusing to listen to young Tommy until he put that into formal logic, right? Imagine someone said this to you, and says, no, not until you put that into formal logic and show me the sentential logic and all the atomized statements. Only then shall I accept your argument. No, you wouldn't bother doing that, right? Because you are able to already obtain the information that's contained within there. You don't need to do that. My opinion, Billy would be a dickhead. Point 4. Certain vagueness, all semantic vagueness, and other issues are just as efficient to be cleared up in natural language, and formalization wouldn't help at all. Imagine the following exchange here. Person 1. Democracy doesn't work. 80% of people don't even know what they are voting for. What makes you say 80% of people don't know what they are voting for? Here's the study, as he links to a website. Person 2, put that website into a syllogism, or I'm going to ignore it. That's probably already ridiculous to you. Would seem like an insane request. It's an empirical claim backed up with a study. Disagreeing on it would not be an issue of syntax, right? This is just looking at the study. Or whenever there's an empirical claim here, if I said, in this box contains a ring, the way to clear that up, whether or not that's true or not, is not through further deductive arguments, right? It's not through improving the structure of my argument. It's through opening the box or having some reason to trust me, right? So things like that are not better cleared up by formalization of arguments. Here's a different example. Person 1, it is unjust to hire men over women for construction work. Person 2, why do you think it's unjust? Person 1, justice is about equality, including equality of the sexes. Hiring them differently is a breach of this equality. Person 2, I'll only believe that if you put it into a syllogism. Obviously, what his point is very, very clear, right? He's defining justice. He's saying justice is important. And then he's explaining on what he thinks justice is and how this breaches it. Formalization is not going to help you understand that because the syntax is already clear here. What might actually be at dispute is what justice is. Again, this would be an insane request. The disagreement isn't about how person 1's points flow into a conclusion, but whether or not his definition of justice is any good. If you disagree with this argument, it's probably because you don't think this perfectly captures what justice is, or maybe he has a simplistic understanding of justice, right? You're saying, well, no, justice isn't equality in all cases, right? Maybe there's reasons to not be equal or not equal. Justice would be equality when there should be equality, not just equality all the time. And that would be a semantic difference, and you would have to get into the definitions of words and understandings in order to sort that out. Fixing the formal structure, the syntax, is not what the problem is. The sorts of things formal logic doesn't help with in arguments. Definitions. So working out what the definition of something should be. A formal structure is not going to help you out with that. Hypotheticals. Hypotheticals help you reach an intuitive understanding of things. Obvious inferences. So if what the inferences are already obvious, then writing them out is just busy work. There's no other point of doing it. Analogies. Trying to relate one thing to another thing in order to get you to understand it in a different perspective. Thought experiments. I think I spelt that word wrong. Or just thorough explanations. And you're going to notice that in philosophical works, if you start reading any philosophical works by any famous philosophers, this is basically what they do, right? These are the sorts of things that they write about, which is why almost all philosophical writing is in natural language and not just a bunch of logical structures. It's because logical structures doesn't help get this sort of information across. There's just no point of doing it. It's just busy work for no reason. The sorts of things formal logic does help with arguments, understanding how the premises relate to the conclusion. So, if that's the case, when is formal logic reasonable to ask for? Certainly there's got to be some cases where it makes sense to ask for something to be, put out in formal logic. And the answer is when the syntax is confusing and it's hard to understand the argument otherwise. So when the vagueness is due to the syntax of the argument, because it's not clear how the premises and the conclusions relate to each other or have anything to do with each other, that's when it's good to bring out formal logic. And a lot of formal logic is used to, illustrate fallacies and errors in thinking. And that's what all this, the truth tables and stuff like that shows. It shows that, the premises that you're using don't really lead to the conclusion that you're saying. And that's when formal logic is important. So here's my example of something that's syntactically confusing. Oh, Bill and Sue are coming to the party? Then I guess Harry and Fred aren't coming, and only either Sarah or Jessica will come. Harry and Fred we're bringing half of the alcohol, so that will fall on either Jessica or Sarah and Jessica, me and you to make up for it. If I bring the alcohol, Sue won't come, but then if Sue doesn't come, Sarah and Jessica will come. So that solves that. That is very confusing. That is about as confusing as I could have made something. The argument involves a ton of simple statements, right? So what I mean by simple statements is Jessica coming to the party, Sarah coming to the party, Bill coming to the party, Sue coming to the party. These are very simple concepts. The semantics of it aren't that difficult. Sue is a person. We all know what a party is. There's not much to discuss there. We all know what alcohol is. I'm pretty sure I spelled that wrong too. I think I spelled it differently twice, so definitely, maybe even both are wrong. But whatever, right? There's the idea of bringing alcohol. These are all very semantically simple concepts. But there's a lot of ifs, ands, or statements. The syntax is confusing. The last sentence, which seems to serve as the conclusion, that solves that, is vague. But perhaps this vagueness could be solved if we could just clear up how everything relates to each other. Perhaps if we did, we'd realize there is no valid conclusion to be drawn. This is a good example of where formalization is useful. Now, if you wanted me to do this, I didn't actually bother. Because I made it confusing enough that I didn't want to go through it. But I just want the general point to be understood of how this is syntactically confusing. Where the previous example about stuff, this or that, things, them, those are semantically confusing because we don't understand what those words mean. Or when we invoke words like justice, something that we would have a disagreement in the definition, that's semantically confusing. And this is syntactically confusing. This is where formal logic is good. In this case, it seems reasonable to ask to figure out how all these statements relate to each other. Point 6. Someone who is good at formal logic should not be asking others to formalize their arguments. They should just do it their damn selves. Right? So I can do all these sorts of things. I know how to atomize statements. I know how to put them into a formal structure. I know how to represent them with symbols and put those symbols with logical operators into premises and conclusions. I know how to do truth tables with those things to show whether they are deductively valid or invalid. But because I'm good at it, doesn't mean I'm going to force other people to have to live up to those requirements in order to present arguments to me, right? I would just be being an asshole at that point. Me being able to take natural language and formalize it into arguments is my ability, not your hindrance. It means if the syntax is causing confusion, me knowing formalization and sentential logic will allow me to find out where the problem lies. It would not force this burden on other people for not knowing. And that's a really important point, especially when it comes to ask yourself's disposition on this. He seems to think, well, you know, since 6 months or 8 months ago or whatever it was that he learned logic finally, that now he can push this burden onto other people rather than using his ability to clear up arguments so that he can further understand them, right? He feels like that's not his job. It's everyone else's job now that he knows logic. That just doesn't make any sense, right? He would be able to find out if arguments make sense or not. But to a point, he seems to disagree that natural language even are arguments. He doesn't count them as arguments at all, even though they're sentences, you know, they're statements with truth value that lead to conclusions. Therefore, you have premises and conclusion. That is the definition of an argument. So here's a summary of all the points that I made. So I'm just going to widen this up here. Right? In arguments, formalization helps with the syntax, not the semantics. That's point 1. Formal arguments can just be as semantically vague as natural language. This dismisses the idea that I'm hiding behind natural language to be vague. Well, if I'm semantically vague, putting it into a formal structure wouldn't have helped you anyways. Syntax is often obvious without being explicitly stated. Just like with the Billy example, you were able to figure out how everything connects anyways, even if it's not explicit. Certain vagueness, including all semantic vagueness and other issues, are just as efficient to be cleared up in natural language, and formalization wouldn't help at all. Formalization is only a reasonable request when the syntax has made an argument confusing. And finally, someone who is good at formal logic should not be asking others to formalize their arguments. They should just do it their damn selves. My last ending remarks here is formalization is not required for a bloody argument, right? That is not what an argument is. If Ask Yourself thinks that what an argument is, he's wrong. You can go ahead and check any critical thinking textbook you want. Just go look it up yourself and confirm whether or not him or I am right about this point. You cannot tell what is wrong with an argument, whether it needs adjusting or formalization, without reading it. Stop being a lazy tit. Ask Yourself has not read my wiki page. He has no idea what it says. So for him to say that what it requires is formalization in order to be understandable is just an assumption on his part. He has no fucking clue. Maybe it's perfectly fine. Maybe it does require some formalization. Maybe the confusion in my argument is semantic, in which case formalization wouldn't have helped anyways. But the way that he would have been able to figure out is by reading the fucking thing, and then perhaps applying some of his own critical thinking to it. Then, and only then, would he be able to make a critique of what some of the problems of it might be. So I hope this sort of cleared things up on my stance of why I don't bother responding to Ask Yourself, asking me to formalize it. I get a lot of people who say to me, well, why don't you just do it? He's asking for it, why don't you just do it? It's a lot like somebody saying to me, you know, I'm only going to listen to your argument if you're hopping on one leg and barking. Why don't I just do that? I mean, then they'll listen to me. Well, the real answer is because they can go fuck themselves. That's why. So, that's my video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys later.